Before we start this video, a large thank you to Ryan, Ben, David, Tyler, and Henry for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. And as always, an immense thank you to Halo Burner for their immense continued support of the channel this month on Patreon. It is sincerely and greatly appreciated, my friend, and I hope you enjoy the video. Hello everybody, today we're going to start the system for implementing our flasks to heal our health and focus points. A shout out to Epic FL Covers for bringing this up. This is a great time to add this into the project now. This is the flask I'm going to be using. I will link it in the description. It is free to download from Sketchfab, I believe. And by the end of it, it'll look something like this. So here I am in Nephilim. You can wishlist Nephilim on Steam, by the way, right now. Link in the description. I will drink a flask on the client. You can see in the host view here, I'm able to see the flask in their hand. But also, if I were to wrap the drink button, I'll start chugging it and won't put it down until I stop. And then if I'm out, you can see the flask changes to this empty color, and the model itself changes as well. So for this to happen, we need to keep track of how many charges we have in the flask. It needs to be public information. But we'll get to all that when we need to. For now, I'm just going to drop the flask model into the project. I'm going to create an empty parent for the pivot because it's almost certain that this is not going to line up with our hand properly unless we make some modifications. I'm then going to make a parent on that pivot, and I'm going to call this the name of the item, which is the health flask. So next, I'm going to create a few materials. The first material I'm going to make here is going to be for the health flask, so I'll call it health_flask_material01, and I'm going to make it red. I'm also going to give it some emission, so it's a bit glowy in the game. You can see it'll be kind of shiny. Give off a little bit of a light, and there we go. Looks nice, cool. I'll make that into a prefab. Now I'm going to quickly do the same thing too for the mana and empty versions. I'm going to call it mana or focus points. When you hear me say different things, it's all the same thing, just blue flask and red flask. So I'll make the mana flask blue, and I will give it emission also, which will also be blue. And then I'll just drag my material on here again. Not going to spend too much time in this, just want to get to the actual process of setting it up, but I will make it look a little bit nice here. So we got something cool for prototyping. There we go, and now I'll change the name from Health Flask to Mana Flask, drag that in as a prefab, and that looks good. Alright, cool, so if you have your own animations for drinking a flask, drop them in right now. If you are a creator, patron, or higher, I've left these in the description for you to download for free. So I'm just going to set them up real fast. If you are going to use these, like me, make sure you copy my animation settings. You want to keep these both to original and check them off, and then click apply. Do this for all the animations down here, and then you're good to go. So again, you don't need these animations. You can use whatever animations you want. You can have something for a placeholder right now. It doesn't really matter. The logic will still work as intended. Now, I'm going to make an empty flask material before I forget, and I'm going to make it like a dull green color. Not going to give it any emission, or you can if you want. It's up to you. But this is just to show when you're out, when you're drinking. So this will be if the player uses the flask when they're out of charges, or if they're trying to chug the flask and they've just run out and they hit the button again to drink it again. So I'm going to save that as a prefab as well. I'm going to call it empty flask. And since this is a prototype, we can use the same empty flask model for both. Not a big deal because they look identical anyway. Now let's go into scripts and then into items. And let's create a new classification of items. So I will give it a folder. It's going to be quick slot items. Alternatively, if you want, you can call this belt items or something else because the term quick slot is kind of very general, I suppose. But there will be different kinds of quick slot items. For example, a flask item is what we're going to make after this. But all quick slot items will share some common variables. So this will be the base class for them. So namespace SG. And then we come in here, drop in your namespace, delete the start and update functionality as is per tradition. Make this derive from the item class. So it gets all of the logic from the item class. And now let's give it some stuff of its own. Let's make a header here for the item model. Let's make a serializable field for the game object. Call it item model. And then what else do all quick slot items have? Well, most of the time they use an animation to actually perform the action. So we'll have a header for the animation. And we can call this, we can make it a string, and we can call it use item animation. And now we can have two virtual voids that we can override. One for attempting to use the item, and then one for seeing if we can even use the item. So public virtual void, attempt to use item, make this require the player manager who is attempting to use it. Call that variable player. All right, cool, looks good. Now, next we can drop in the function to determine if we can use the item or not. So public virtual void, so we can override it. Can I use this item? And again, we pass the player, as in the player using the item, call that player. And for now, I'm just going to return true, and that's not supposed to be a void, that's my bad, it's supposed to be a bool. So we can get a true or false. Defaultly, I will just, again, say true because this is the base class. We're never actually going to make this into a scriptable object. We're going to make other scriptable objects that will inherit from this class. So if I cannot use this item, this is under attempt to use item, the function return. Otherwise, we're just going to simply say player.playerAnimatorManager dot play target action animation. And then we will pass the use item animation, and we can say true for is interacting, but it doesn't matter right now. We're just going to make sure it works. We could set all of those variables for moving and stuff later on. Okay, make a new folder in your assets and scripts again if you want. I'm going to call this one Flasks, and I'm just going to make a new script for Flask item. And I guess you don't need to give it a folder because honestly it'll probably just be the one script we can use for both of these, but I'll give it a folder just because it looks neat. I'm going to drop in my namespace, delete the start update functionality, and then I'm going to make the Flask item script derived from quick slot item. And we're going to save that. Alright, I'm going to drop in my create asset menu names, going to be items, consumables. I'm just going to call this Flask. I copied this from Nephilim, which is why it says life Flask. I'll just erase this because in Nephilim I use two different scriptable objects for my Flasks, which isn't really necessary to be honest. So in this tutorial series, I'm only going to use the one. Let's go and create that that item now. So go under data, items, make a new folder for Flasks, and then drop in your Flask by creating it. And then we can duplicate it and make a few because we can make the health flask and then the mana flask. And we can also drop in the names and stuff now. So the first one, health flask, and the use item animation, we don't need to put that in right now. Let's go back over to the Flask script first. Let's make a header for the empty item model, which we will instantiate if we're trying to chug the flask or we're trying to use it and there are no charges left. So serialized field game object empty flask item, we can drag it in as well. Let's get the empty flask here from our assets. There we go. Cool, and now let's get the regular health flask item for our item model. Looks good. Now I'm going to go to the world item database, and now you guys have done this a bunch. Just make new entries now for the flask, or sorry, the quick slot item type. So make a list, and then get all the items in that list and add it to the total item database. Make them get their identification by adding their IDs. And then you want to get the search function for grabbing these from the list when we want to get them. So header quick slots, I have my list here called quick slot items. I'm going to go down here and we're going to say for each item in quick slot items, here's the for each loop, referencing quick slot items, we're going to say items.add the item from quick slot items. So it adds it to the total items list. And then we get the ID by doing that because right below that we're going through all the items and giving them an ID. And then we can make our search function here by copying any of these, changing the variable type to quick slot item, changing it to get quick slot item by ID, and then searching the list for quick slot items. And that's it. Cool, great. Now we have a way to get that. Save. That's good. Now come over to our world item database and drag in your Flask. Cool, now I'm going to go to the player inventory manager and we're going to set up a current quick slot item, just like we do a current spell. And as you probably guessed by now, that means we're going to have to give this a network variable for its ID, which is why we use the list to get it. So when we switch our quick slot item locally, it switches for our game object and everybody else's game. So go to your player network manager now and copy any of these integer variables that are used for identification for your other items like your weapon or your spell, etc., etc. Change it to current quick slot item ID. Now, likewise, go down here and where we have these on spell ID changed, etc., copy one of those on spell on weapon ID changed. Change it to on current quick slots item or current quick slot. I'm going to use quick slot item. It sounds very direct. Change the variable type to quick slot item. Rename the other variable to quick slot item, new quick slot item, and then get it by searching the list of quick slot items by saying world item database.instance get quick slot item by ID. And if it is not null, we're going to assign that quick slot item variable to that item we searched. And then we're going to assign the player inventory current quick slot item to the new quick slot item. Now, the HUD manager, if you're the owner, cool, we still need to do this. Set quick slot item, quick slot icon. So let's go over to the player HUD manager now and set that up because we don't have that function. It does not exist. So it's going to throw us an error. Player UI HUD manager. Let's copy our spell or weapon quick slot item variable here as an image. So quick slot item quick slot icon. Cool. Once you got that, come down here and copy our set spell item quick slot icon and replace spell with quick slot item. So the variable spell item becomes quick slot item, and then the name spell becomes quick slot item. And then we're not searching by get spell, we're searching get quick slot item, and we're not searching spell ID. So rename this. Whoops, gonna have to rename the function first or else it won't actually change. So first rename your function from set spell item to set quick slot item. And now you can rename the local variable and now it should change. And it does. So item ID, cool, great. Now make sure you go down here and wherever it says spell item quick slot icon, which is in 6 places if I'm counting correctly, you want to change that to quick slot item quick slot icon. That's fun to say 10 times fast. All right, save that. And now we also need to put a note here to do update quantity showing in the UI and fade out the icon if there is none remaining. Now I have these item icons here, which I will add to the scripts download in the description. And I'm just going to throw these on here so we can actually see when it's in our UI. So I'm going to add the mana icon. I'm going to make the mana flask first by duplicating the health flask. I'm going to make sure I add the icon and change it to health flask game object for the mana flask, and also I'm going to add the icon in for my health flask as well. So drag that into the quick slot items list here in your world item database if you made that as well. Next, go to your animator. Now we have a layer here for upper body override, which is what we're going to use because we want to allow walking while we're drinking. Unless you don't, if you want to go the Dark Souls 1 route, put it on your action override. That won't allow you to move. So next, drag in the animation here. If you're using mine, it's medium O1 drink and up. Up is the start. It's where you tilt the flask up. And then drink is where you actually are going to get the healing benefit go off. So item flask drink is what we're going to call that initial animation. Actually, we'll call it item flask drink start 01 with underscores behind after each word. Next, we're going to make an arrow, a transition to the other animation we're actually drinking. We'll call this item flask drink 01. And then we're going to make the exit time 1 and transition duration 0 if you're using my animations because they link up perfectly. You don't need to basically make it fade or blend in. Next, copy the drinking animation and call it drink 2. Why are we doing this? Well, if we're going to chug, we're going to go back and forth between 1 and 2, just replaying each other basically. Add a parameter in the animator for is chugging. Flask, we'll say. Now, from 1 to 2, if you are chugging, add a condition here. Is chugging flask true? Has exit time, keep that there, and you can blend it a little bit so it's nice and smooth. And then go back and do the same thing from 2 to 1. If is chugging flask is true, go back to 1, keep a bit of a blend there so it's nice and smooth. And then flask down is where you want to end. Make a transition from both drink 1 and 2 to flask down, which I'm going to call item flask end 01, and make the parameter if is chugging equals false. Now see, if at any point the flask runs out of charges, we're going to interrupt this animation using a script on the animation state to make it play the flask empty. But for now, don't worry about it. Let's make sure all this works first and we can walk around while drinking, etc. So if is chugging flask is false, go back to end and then make the end go back to upper body empty. So that's basically how it's going to look. Now I will just drag in my flask empty animation here and set it up just so it's done. So I will call this... we'll call it item underscore flask underscore empty underscore 01 and make that translate back to upper body empty as well. All right, cool. Looks very good. Go over now into the player controls, and you can see here we actually already have the X button here. So if you don't have that, add something to use items. If you want to give it its own input, do that now. If you want to use a different input, do that now. Make an input basically for using the item. We already have X, so we're going to use X. Now, over under Player Input Manager, under Player Action Input, I'm going to copy Interaction Input and paste it, and I'm going to say use underscore item input. So, cool, looks good. Go down here now. Under Actions, I'm going to put this. I'm just going to basically copy the Interact input again. I'm going to change Player Controls.PlayerActions Interact to X. I'm going to change Interaction Input to use item input. And then we're going to set this up in a function. So wherever you want to place it, I think I'm going to place mine right at the top, actually right below handle all inputs. I'm going to make a comment here for use items so it's easy to see. The green sticks out, it's nice and easy to read. private void handle use item input. Now, what are we going to do here? Well, we're going to do the thing we normally do. We're going to check if the item input is pressed. If it is, we're going to set it to false. Now, we don't want to be able to use an item while we're in a menu, because most of the time if you're in a menu, you're probably using X to do something else, like unequip a piece of armor. So I'm going to say if player UI manager instance menu window is open, return. You can also do this with pop-up, but I'm not going to do that, because if you get a pop-up in a boss fight and can't drink your flask, that's really not too great on the player, especially if you really need to heal in that situation. So I'm just going to check for the menu window open, then return. So if we pass our check, we're going to say if player.player inventory manager .current quick slot item does not equal null, we're going to reference that item and attempt to use that item, and then pass the player by saying player.player inventory manager current quick slot item attempt to use item, and then we're going to pass the player. Now, to do, sync this on the network and make sure we do this action as well with our game object in other people's games. So as for now, that'll be a comment until we get the whole system working. Then we'll go back and sync it for network play. So send the server RPC so our player performs item action on other clients' game windows. Save that. Now, under handle all inputs, drop in your new function for handle use item input. Cool. Gonna save again. Gonna go back to the project window now and search up the player manager, because I didn't yet reference that on value changed network function. So I'm gonna come down here under our equipment. I'm gonna copy anything really. It actually should belong, actually now I'm thinking about it, above or under the current spell ID. So we're gonna say player network manager current quick slot item ID on value changed plus equals player network manager on current quick slot item ID changed, the function we just made a little while ago. And I am going to move this to right above or under the current spell ID dot on value change. So it's up here with the rest of the quick slot stuff. Yeah, right above seems fine. Now come down here where we are on network despawn, do the same thing, but say minus equals, so we unsubscribe from the function. All right, looks good. Save that. Now, get your animation name. Mine is item underscore flash drink start 01 with underscores after every word. Go to your items and drop that in for the use item animation. And now let's start the game. Oh, forgot one thing. I should go to the player UI, go to the HUD manager, and drag in our variable for quick slot item icon. Otherwise, you won't actually get the icon pop up when you're equipping the flask. All right, cool. Now I'm going to save that prefab. Now in the game here, I changed my current quick slot item ID to 17, which is the ID of the flask. You can see I have it here. Cool. And if I use item, yes, the drink animation plays. All right, so let's do a few more things now. Let's actually just take this attempt to use item and completely override it. So like we could set it up here for attempt to use item. You could say, yes, we are performing the action. No, we're not using remotion. Yes, we can rotate, blah, blah, blah. But since this is the base class, this is going to change for different items that we create in the future. Like throwing knives and bombs won't behave the same way as, for example, the flask. So I'm just going to override it in flask item completely. And then I'm just going to give it my own logic. So I'm going to erase the base attempt to use item, and I'm just going to paste in the same logic. Basically, we're going to do a check, and I'm going to revert this to what it was before. We're going to do a check for using the item. And then we're going to, if we pass the check, we're going to use the item. And for now, we're just going to simply pass the check because we have no thing we're checking to fail, like no quantity, nothing like that. So make the use item animation and the item model protected so we can access them from the Flask item script. Cool. Now, you can see previously we made can run as a variable. That's great because we want to be able to walk around while using the Flask. So go to your play target action animation on the character animation manager and add a bool for can run and set it defaultly to true. And then do the same thing on play target action animation instantly. What we're going to do now is set can run to whatever we pass as can run. You don't need to update this on the server RPC because our vertical and horizontal input is being controlled by us anyway. So if it's limited on our side, it will be limited when it gets updated to the network. So you only got to basically add these here locally. All right, cool. We can save that. Now go back to our Flask and I'm going to set can run to false. Now we have to reset can run and we also have to instantiate an item. So let's say player.player effects manager, and we don't have a variable for this right now. I think we have one for the spell warm-up effects and the projectile. You could give them a general one. I like giving them separate ones. It just tastes really preference, I should say. So I'm going to give it a separate public game object active quick slot item effects. Now, wherever I find the warm-up effects for a spell, I'll have to destroy that so we can find it that way. But first, let's say player.player effect manager active quick slot item effects equals instantiate a copy of the item model And I'm going to instantiate at the location of player.player.equipment manager.right-hand-weapon-slot.transform. I'm doing this so it pops up in my right hand. If you have different animations, you want to go to a different place, you can do that here. Just wherever you want to instantiate it, place it there. All right, let's save that. Now I'm going to go and look for every time I find this spell warm-up effect. And if it's applicable, I'm going to destroy also the item warm-up effect. This one's on reset action flag. So when you reset some kind of action via your animation, we're going to say that if the active item, quick slot item effect is not null, we're going to destroy it. Now let's keep looking. Right here on the destroy all current action effect client RPC, do the same thing. If the item is not null here, destroy it. Looks good. Going to save that. So if active quick slot item effect does not equal null, destroy it. And if I keep looking, that seems to be it. The rest is just for spell stuff only. Next, I'm going to add a reset upper body action on our upper body empty state. We're doing this because we never actually get to the reset action script on the default action override, because this has its own animation layer and needs to behave a little bit differently also anyway. So make our namespace here and then make a character a player manager variable, whichever you prefer. I personally am not going to have, at least at this point in the series, the AI drinking from Flasks. It won't be very hard to change if we want to add that ourselves anyway. So for now, I am just going to reference the player. And we're going to say if the player is equal null, the player is equal to the animator.getComponent player manager. If the player is still equal to null, simply return. Cool. All right. So let's take the player now. We're going to say if the player.playerEffectManager.active quick slot effect item does not equal null, we're going to simply destroy it. So again, when we get to the end of this animation, we want to destroy it. And we already placed it on the client RPC for destroying it. So if we get interrupted while drinking this, it should destroy if we set it up properly. Now, if we go into the game here again and I drink it, that is massive. Okay, so let's pause this here. Let's just drink it again. And then we're going to go and grab that and we're going to edit the pivot at this point. So go to the game object under your Flask item pivot and keep resizing that until it fits nicely in your hand or wherever you're instantiating it. Maybe you're putting it on your forehead. I don't know. I'm going to reset the transform here until I get it nicely fitting in the hand. Change the rotation. Here we go. Copy component. This is what I chose in the end. Again, not going to spend too much time on this. Just want to get it looking appropriate for a prototype. Paste here in the item pivot. And then do the same thing with all my other flasks. And now if we go into the game here, I'm going to hide my weapons so it's not so ugly. You can see, boom, I can drink the flask and I can walk around, but I can't run again. So let's quickly fix that real fast. I'm going to go back into reset upper body action. I'm going to say player.player.locomotion.manager.canRun is equal to true. I'm going to save that. Go back into the game here now. If I drink my flask, put away my weapons so I can see it nicely. There we go. I'm able to run when I'm done. If I start, then I'll stop and start walking. Cool, working as intended so far. We've got to add a bunch of other things to this, obviously, but it's in a good place right now. So in the next video, we're going to make it so we actually will heal either our health or our mana/focus points when you drink from these. And if we have the time as well, we'll make some basic effects. We'll also add some sound effects. So here's what's on the docket for the next couple of videos. We're going to get these flasks working in their entirety, and then we're going to go back and update our UI so we can equip these flasks from our UI. And we'll also add a place to equip our arrows since we've done those in a previous video. Alright guys, thank you very much for joining me again this weekend. I hope you all have a very lovely weekend. As always, an immense thank you to my patrons. It is because of each and every one of you I get to keep doing this, and I love doing this. If you haven't already, you should check out Nephilim on Steam. It is able to be played as a demo right now that is being updated. Expect bugs, of course, and if you want to drop me a wish list, that would be very much appreciated. I'll see you guys in the next one.